The dust swirled around Natalie Vaughn's boots as she hammered the last fence post into the unforgiving Oregon ground, her father's grave still fresh on the hillside behind the ranch house, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had exactly 3 months before the bank came calling for money she did not have. Her arms ached from the work, muscles trembling as she set down the hammer and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Pendleton landscape, turning everything golden and harsh. She was 22 years old, alone for the first time in her life, and responsible for 200 acres of struggling ranch land that her father had poured his heart into for 30 years. Thomas Vaughn had died of a heart attack 3 weeks ago, dropping dead while fixing the barn door on a Tuesday morning. One moment he was alive, laughing at something Natalie had said about the chickens getting loose again, and the next he was gone. The doctor said it was quick, that he likely did not feel much pain, but that did not make the silence in the house any easier to bear. Natalie walked back toward the ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure her grandfather had built in 1855 when he first came to Oregon. The paint was peeling now, the wood weathered gray in places, but it stood solid against the wind that came down from the Blue Mountains. Inside, the house felt too big, too empty, echoing with memories of her mother's laughter before she died of fever when Natalie was 12, and her father's heavy footsteps on the stairs. She poured herself water from the pitcher on the kitchen table and drank deeply, staring out the window at the cattle grazing in the far pasture. 40 head of cattle, down from the 70 her father had maintained just 2 years ago. They had lost animals to disease, to harsh winters, to rustlers who came through in the night. The ranch was dying slowly, and Natalie did not know how to save it. The sound of hoofbeats made her set down her glass and move to the door. A rider was approaching from the east, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She reached for her father's rifle, keeping it low but ready. You did not survive alone in Oregon Territory in 1878 by being careless. As the rider drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man on a dappled gray horse, wearing a dusty brown hat and riding with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He raised one hand in greeting as he approached, keeping his movements slow and visible. "Afternoon," he called out when he was close enough to be heard without shouting. "This the Vaughn Ranch?" "It is," Natalie replied, not lowering the rifle. "What's your business here?" The man reined in his horse about 20 feet from the porch, respecting the distance. Up close, she could see he was young, maybe 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was serious now. "Name's Daniel Parker," he said. "I heard in town that Thomas Vaughn passed. I'm real sorry for your loss. He was a good man. You knew my father?" Natalie asked, her grip on the rifle loosening slightly. "Met him a few times at the cattlemen's meetings in town. He always spoke fair and treated people decent." Daniel shifted in his saddle. "I've been working on the Riverside Ranch up north for the past 5 years, but I'm looking to make a change. Heard you might need help running this place." Natalie stared at him, surprised by his directness. "Who told you that?" "Sarah at the general store. She mentioned you were trying to manage things alone." He paused, seeming to measure his words carefully. "Look, I know how this sounds. You don't know me, and you've got no reason to trust a stranger showing up at your door. But I'm a hard worker. I know cattle and horses, and I can fix just about anything that breaks on a ranch. I'm not asking for much in wages, just fair pay and a place to sleep." "Why?" Natalie asked bluntly. Why leave a steady job at Riverside Ranch to work for someone who might not be able to pay you in 3 months? Daniel's expression shifted, something honest and raw crossing his face. Because I'm tired of working for other people's dreams. I want to build something, to have a stake in something that matters. And maybe I'm crazy, but when I heard about your situation, I thought maybe we could help each other out. You need someone who knows ranching, and I need a place where my work means something more than just another day's wages. It was the kind of foolish, idealistic thing that should have made Natalie send him away immediately. But there was something in his eyes, a steadiness and sincerity that reminded her of her father. And God knew she needed help. She had been running herself ragged for 3 weeks, trying to do the work of 3 men alone, and she was losing ground every day. I can't pay much, she said finally. $15 a month in meals. There's a room above the barn that's dry and has a stove. That's fair, Daniel said, and his face broke into a smile that transformed it, making him look younger and somehow more real. Thank you, Miss Vaughn. You won't regret this. We'll see about that, Natalie replied, but she lowered the rifle completely. You can put your horse in the stable. There's fresh hay in the loft. Come up to the house when you're settled, and I'll show you around the property. She watched him ride toward the barn, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had just hired a complete stranger based on nothing more than instinct and desperation. Her father would have done 100 background checks, asked for references, investigated every aspect of the man's history. But her father was dead, and she was making decisions alone now, for better or worse. 20 minutes later, Daniel knocked on the kitchen door. Natalie had set out cold chicken and bread on the table, along with coffee that was probably too strong but was how her father had always liked it. Sit, she said. You must be hungry if you rode from town. I appreciate it, Daniel said, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. His hair was sweat-dampened and curling more than before. He washed his hands in the basin by the door before sitting down at the table. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the kind of comfortable quiet that came from 2 people who were used to their own company. Natalie studied him when she thought he was not looking, noting the calluses on his hands, the way he sat like someone who was used to long hours in the saddle, the scar that ran along his left forearm. How'd you get that? She asked, nodding at the scar. Daniel glanced down at his arm. Barbed wire, 3 years back. Got tangled up breaking a wild horse that decided he did not want to be broken. Learned my lesson about being more careful around spooked animals. My father always said horses could sense when you were not paying attention. He was right, Daniel agreed. He took a sip of his coffee and his eyebrows rose slightly. This is strong. Too strong. No, it's perfect. Just wakes you up proper. He set down his cup. So tell me about the ranch. What's the situation? Natalie appreciated his straightforwardness. 40 head of cattle, down from 72 years ago. We've had disease, harsh winters, and some rustling problems. The fences are in bad shape, half the equipment needs repairs, and the barn roof leaks in 3 places. I owe the bank $800 that comes due in November, and I've got about $200 in cash. My father had been planning to sell some cattle in the fall to make the payment, but I don't know if we'll have enough weight on them by then to get the price we need. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. What about the water situation? We've got a good well near the house and a creek that runs through the north pasture. That's one thing we've got going for us. That's important, Daniel said. Water's worth more than gold out here. He was quiet for a moment, thinking, all right, here's what I'm thinking. We focus on 3 things. Get the fences secure so we don't lose any more cattle. Get those animals as healthy and fat as possible for the fall sale, and fix the critical things that are costing you money, or could cause bigger problems down the line. Everything else waits. That's pretty much what I figured, Natalie said. I've been working on the fences, but it's slow going alone. Two of us will move faster, Daniel said. We can start tomorrow morning. I'll take the east section if you want to keep working on the west. Natalie felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since her father died. Having someone to share the work with, someone who understood what needed to be done without her having to explain every detail, was more of a relief than she had expected. "There's something else you should know," she said. "There's been talk in town. People wondering how long I can hold out, whether I should just sell the place and move into town, maybe find work as a seamstress or a teacher. Some of them think a woman has no business running a ranch alone." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "What do you think?" "I think this ranch is my home. My grandfather built this house with his own hands. My mother is buried on that hill, and now my father is too. This land is in my blood, and I'm not giving it up without a fight." "Good," Daniel said simply. "Then we'll make it work." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but satisfying. They rose before dawn and worked until the sun set, stopping only for quick meals and water. Daniel proved to be exactly what he had claimed. A skilled ranch hand who could do everything from mending fences to doctoring sick cattle to fixing the complicated mechanism on the well pump that had been giving Natalie trouble for months. He was also easy to work with, which Natalie had not expected. Some men she had known became insufferable when given any authority, or they refused to take direction from a woman. But Daniel treated her as an equal partner, asking for her opinions on decisions and respecting her knowledge of the land and animals. When they disagreed, which happened occasionally, they talked it through until they found a solution that made sense to both of them. "You've got good instincts," Daniel told her one evening as they were walking back from checking on a pregnant cow in the far pasture. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made the whole landscape glow. "That call you made about moving the cattle to the north pasture last week was smart. Better grazing up there." "My father taught me to read the land," Natalie said. "He always said the ranch would tell you what it needed if you paid attention. He was a wise man." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their boots crunching in the dry grass. Natalie found herself increasingly aware of Daniel's presence beside her, the way he moved with that easy cowboy grace, the sound of his breathing after a long day's work. She had not expected to enjoy his company as much as she did. In the evenings after dinner, they sometimes sat on the porch and talked about their lives, their dreams, the things they had seen and done. She learned that Daniel had grown up in Wyoming, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had died of cholera when he was 16, and he had been on his own ever since, working various ranch jobs across the West. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. He read books, which surprised her until he explained that his mother had been a teacher and had instilled in all her boys a love of learning. "What kind of books?" Natalie had asked, curious. "Anything I can get my hands on. Right now I'm reading Ivanhoe for the 3rd time. I've got it in my saddlebag if you want to borrow it when I'm done." She had not read a novel in months, too exhausted and grief-stricken to focus on anything beyond survival. But the idea appealed to her, a reminder that there was more to life than just work and worry. One morning in late August, Natalie woke to the sound of shouting. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside in her nightgown and bare feet to find Daniel in the yard, facing down 3 men on horseback. She recognized them immediately. Jake Morrison and his 2 brothers, troublemakers who owned a small spread east of town and had a reputation for theft and violence. "What's going on here?" Natalie called out, keeping her rifle ready. "Just having a conversation with your hired hand," Jake said. He was a thick-built man with a mean smile and small, calculating eyes. "Telling him that you might be interested in selling some cattle. We're prepared to offer you a fair price." "I'm not selling," Natalie said firmly, "and you need to leave my property." "Now, that's not very friendly," Jake's younger brother Seth said. "We're trying to help you out. Word in town is you're struggling to make ends meet. We could take those cattle off your hands right now, save you the trouble of trying to fatten them up for the fall sale." "At half what they're worth, I'm guessing," Daniel said, his voice cold. "We know how you operate, Morrison. The answer is no. Time for you to ride out." Jake's expression turned ugly. "I was not talking to you, Drifter. I was talking to the lady. This is her ranch, not yours." "And the lady told you no," Natalie said, raising her rifle to her shoulder. "You've got about 10 seconds to get off my land before I start shooting, and unlike you, I don't miss." For a long moment, the three brothers stared at her, weighing their options. Then Jake spat in the dirt and jerked his horse's head around. "You're making a mistake," he said. "This ranch is going under one way or another. Might as well get something for it while you can." They rode off at a gallop, leaving dust hanging in the morning air. Natalie lowered her rifle, her heart pounding. She realized she was shaking, adrenaline flooding through her system. "You all right?" Daniel asked, moving to her side. "I'm fine. I've dealt with Jake Morrison before. He's been sniffing around the property ever since my father got sick, hoping to pick up land cheap." She looked at Daniel. "Thank you for backing me up." "That's what partners do," Daniel said. And something in the way he said the word partners made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear or anger. She became aware suddenly that she was standing in the yard in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, and that Daniel was very carefully keeping his eyes on her face and nowhere else. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I should get dressed," she said, backing toward the house. "I'll get started on the morning chores," Daniel replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice even though she was already turning away. Inside, she leaned against the door and closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Something was changing between them, something that went beyond the easy partnership they had developed over the past month. She had caught herself watching him more often, noticing things like the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted hay bales, or the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. At night, lying alone in her bed, she sometimes thought about what it would be like to have him closer, to not be so completely alone, but that was dangerous thinking. Daniel was an employee, nothing more. He had come here looking for work, not for romance with a struggling ranch owner who could barely pay him. And even if there was something between them, she could not afford to act on it. She needed his help too desperately to risk complicating things with feelings. Still, as the days passed, it became harder to ignore what was growing between them. There were moments when their hands would brush while working together, or when she would look up to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. They lingered longer at dinner, talking late into the evening about everything and nothing. He taught her how to play poker using dried beans as betting chips, and she taught him how to make her mother's apple pie recipe. One evening, in early September, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder cracked overhead and lightning lit up the sky in brilliant flashes. Natalie was in the barn checking on the horses when Daniel came running in, soaked from the sudden downpour. "That came up fast," he said, water dripping from his hat brim. "I secured everything in the yard, but we might want to check on that weak spot in the barn roof." As if in answer, they heard a drip starting in the far corner. Natalie groaned. "That's right above where we store the grain. Come on, help me move the sacks before they get wet." They worked quickly, hauling 50-pound sacks of grain to a drier location while the storm raged outside. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the barn walls, illuminating everything in stark white and shadow. The air smelled of rain and hay and horses. They were moving the last sack when Natalie's foot slipped on the wet floor. She stumbled and Daniel caught her, his arms coming around her waist to steady her. For a moment they stood frozen, her hands on his chest, his arms around her. She could feel the heat of him through his wet shirt, the solid strength of his body, the rapid beating of his heart that matched her own. "Natalie," he said softly, and there was a question in her name. She looked up at him, at his face so close to hers, and knew that if she kissed him now, everything would change. There would be no going back to the simple partnership they had built. It would complicate everything, could ruin everything if it went wrong. But looking into his eyes, gray-blue like the storm outside, she found she did not care about any of that. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, and the world disappeared into the feeling of his mouth on hers, gentle at first and then deeper, more urgent. His hands came up to cradle her face and she gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Me too," Natalie whispered. "I thought I was imagining things. You weren't." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his expression serious. "But Natalie, I need you to know something. I did not come here for this. I came here to work to help save this ranch, and that's still what I want to do. Whatever this is between us, it doesn't change that I'm here for the long haul. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she said. "I trust you." "Good." He smiled and kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter. "We should probably get back to the house before we both catch our death of cold." They ran through the rain together, laughing like children, and burst into the kitchen dripping and breathless. Natalie got towels while Daniel built up the fire in the stove. They changed into dry clothes in separate rooms and met back in the kitchen, where Natalie made hot coffee and they sat close together at the table, hands intertwined. "So what happens now?" Natalie asked. "Now we keep doing what we've been doing," Daniel said. "Working the ranch, building it back up, but we do it together in every sense of the word." He squeezed her hand. "If that's what you want." "It is," Natalie said. "It really is." The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Natalie's life despite the constant work and worry. Having Daniel's partnership in every aspect of running the ranch made everything easier, and having his affection made even the hardest days bearable. They stole kisses while working, held hands at dinner, and spent evenings on the porch swing talking about their future. Daniel never pushed for more than she was ready to give, respecting her boundaries and the conventions of the time. But there was an understanding between them now, an unspoken promise that they were building toward something permanent. In late September, they drove the cattle to the sale yard in Pendleton. Natalie's stomach was in knots as they watched the bidding, knowing that everything depended on getting a good price. The cattle looked better than she had dared hope, fat and healthy from the summer grazing and the careful attention they had received. When the final bid came in, Natalie did the math in her head and felt weak with relief. They had made enough to pay the bank, cover the winter supplies, and have a small cushion left over. The ranch was safe, at least for now. "We did it," she said to Daniel as they walked back to where they had tied their horses. "You did it," Daniel corrected. "This is your ranch, your dream." "I just helped a little." "You did more than help a little," Natalie said. She stopped and turned to face him, not caring that they were on a public street in town. "Daniel, I need to ask you something." "Anything," he said. "What do you want from life, I mean, from the future?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "I want a home. A real home, not just a place I work. I want to build something that lasts, something I can be proud of. I want a family someday, kids to teach how to ride and rope and take care of the land." He met her eyes. "And I want to spend my life with someone I love and respect as an equal, someone strong enough to stand beside me through whatever comes." "That sounds like a good dream," Natalie said softly. "It does, doesn't it?" Daniel reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "What about you? What do you want?" "The same things, I think," Natalie said. "I want to keep my family's ranch going, make it thrive again. I want to honor my parents' memory by building on what they started. And I want someone to share it all with, someone who understands that the ranch is part of who I am and always will be." "Natalie Vaughn," Daniel said, and his voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you stood on your porch with your rifle, determined to protect what was yours. You're the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life as your partner in every way that matters." Tears sprang to Natalie's eyes. "I love you too. I was so alone after my father died, and then you showed up and everything got better. Not easier exactly, but better. Like I could breathe again." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her close despite the people walking past on the street. "Marry me," he said into her hair. "Be my wife, let me be your husband. We'll run the ranch together, build it into something amazing. I'll work every day to make you happy, to be worthy of your trust." "Yes," Natalie said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They kissed right there on Main Street in Pendleton, and Natalie did not care who saw or what they thought. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time since her father died. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in town. Sarah from the general store stood as Natalie's witness, and Tom from the Riverside Ranch stood for Daniel. Natalie wore a cream-colored dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her taller frame, and Daniel wore a new suit he had bought with his saved wages. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed her with such tenderness that Natalie felt her heart might burst. The celebration was small, just a few friends at the ranch for dinner, and dancing to music from a fiddle player Sarah's husband knew. But it was perfect, exactly what Natalie wanted. As the sun set and the stars came out, she and Daniel danced alone in the yard, swaying to music only they could hear. "Happy?" Daniel asked. "Completely," Natalie said, resting her head against his chest. "Are you sure you know what you've gotten yourself into? A wife who can outshoot you and will argue with you about cattle management." Daniel laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "That's exactly what I signed up for. I don't want some delicate flower who needs protecting. I want a partner who can stand on her own but chooses to stand with me." "Good answer," Natalie said, tilting her face up for a kiss. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with snow piling up higher than Natalie had seen in years and temperatures that dropped so low the well froze twice. But the ranch house was warm, the barn was secure, and they worked together to keep the cattle safe and fed. At night, they lay in bed together talking about their plans for spring, for expanding the herd, for fixing up the house. Daniel proved to be a man of his word in every way. He treated the ranch as if it were his own while still respecting that it was Natalie's inheritance and always would be. They made decisions together, sometimes arguing passionately about the best course of action, but always coming to agreements they could both support. He never tried to diminish her role or take over completely, and she came to trust him with every aspect of their life together. In late February, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still for a moment, his fork halfway to his mouth, And then a smile spread across his face so wide and genuine that Natalie started laughing. "Really?" he asked. "We're going to have a baby. In late summer, I think," Natalie confirmed. "How do you feel about that?" Daniel got up and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I feel like the luckiest man in Oregon," he said. "Maybe in the whole country. A beautiful wife, a ranch that's starting to thrive, and now a baby on the way. What more could any man want?" The pregnancy was harder than Natalie expected. She felt tired all the time during the first few months, and there were mornings when she could barely keep food down. But Daniel was patient and supportive, taking on extra work so she could rest when she needed to. He brought her ginger tea for the nausea and read to her in the evenings from the stack of books they had accumulated. As spring turned to summer and her belly grew round, Natalie found herself having to accept that she could not do everything she was used to doing. It frustrated her, being limited by her own body, but Daniel reminded her gently that she was doing the most important work of all, growing their child. "The ranch will still be here," he said when she fretted about not being able to help with the roundup. "But you need to take care of yourself and the baby. That's what matters most right now." Their son was born on a hot August evening in 1879, with Sarah assisting and Daniel pacing anxiously downstairs. The labor was long and difficult, but when Natalie finally held the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, she thought she had never seen anything so perfect. "Come meet your son," she called out weakly when Sarah opened the door to let Daniel in. Daniel approached almost tentatively, as if he was afraid to break the spell. When he looked down at the baby, his expression transformed into something Natalie had never seen before: pure, overwhelming love mixed with wonder and a hint of terror. "He's so small," Daniel whispered. "He won't be for long," Sarah said with a laugh. "Babies grow faster than you can believe." "Now, have you two decided on a name?" Natalie and Daniel looked at each other. They had talked about names for months, going back and forth between options. But looking at her husband's face now, Natalie knew exactly what she wanted. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Daniel Parker, after both our fathers." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Your father should be the one honored. And your parents should be honored too," Natalie said. "Besides, Daniel is in there. This baby is part of both of us, both our families. It feels right." Daniel leaned down and kissed her gently, then placed the softest kiss on his son's forehead. "Hello, Thomas," he said. "Welcome to the world. Your mother and I have been waiting to meet you." The next few months were exhausting in entirely new ways. Thomas was a healthy baby but demanding, wanting to be fed every few hours and crying with impressive volume when he was displeased. Natalie walked the floor with him at night, singing the songs her mother had sung to her, while Daniel took over even more of the ranch work. But gradually, they found their rhythm as a family. Thomas started sleeping longer stretches at night, giving them more rest. Natalie healed from the birth and was able to gradually resume more of her ranch duties. Daniel proved to be a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, talking to him constantly even though the baby could not understand the words. "He needs to learn about the ranch," Daniel explained when Natalie teased him about his long one-sided conversations with Thomas. "I'm teaching him all the important things." "He's 4 months old," Natalie pointed out. "Never too early to start," Daniel said seriously, though his eyes were laughing. As Thomas grew into a toddler, the ranch continued to improve. They added more cattle, fixed up the outbuildings, and even managed to hire a part-time ranch hand to help with the heavy work. The debt to the bank was slowly shrinking, and they were able to save a little money each season. It was not an easy life, but it was a good one, filled with hard work and love and satisfaction. When Thomas was 3 years old, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, a tiny, perfect thing with her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. "What should we name her?" Daniel asked, cradling his daughter with the confidence of someone who had done this before. "I was thinking Elizabeth after your mother," Natalie said, "if that's all right with you." Daniel looked up at her with so much love in his eyes that Natalie felt her breath catch. "Elizabeth Vaughn Parker," he said. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole family is perfect." The years that followed were busy and full. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. Elizabeth was quieter, more contemplative, but with a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of her mother. They had one more child, a son they named James, born in 1885. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Natalie's instincts for the land and animals combined with Daniel's technical skills and business sense made them a formidable team. They expanded their holdings, buying the adjoining property when it came up for sale in 1887, and their herd grew to over 200 head. But it was not just about the work and the success. It was about the life they built together, the small moments that made up their days. It was Daniel teaching Thomas to rope a calf, while Elizabeth sat on the fence cheering them on. It was Natalie reading stories to all 3 children on rainy evenings, while Daniel worked on repairing tack by lamplight. It was falling into bed exhausted every night and waking up to do it all again, together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Natalie by taking her on a picnic to the hill where her parents were buried. They sat on a blanket looking out over the ranch land spread below them, watching their children play in the wildflowers that covered the hillside. "Remember when you told me this land was in your blood?" Daniel asked. "The day I asked you to let me work here." "I remember everything about that day," Natalie said. "I did not understand it then, not really, but I do now." He gestured out at the landscape, the house and barns and pastures they had worked so hard to build and maintain. "This is more than just property or a business. It's home in the deepest sense. It's where our children are learning who they are and what they're capable of. It's where we've built our life together. And it's where we'll grow old together," Natalie added, leaning against his shoulder. "Watching our children grow up, maybe seeing grandchildren someday." "God willing," Daniel agreed. He wrapped his arm around her. "You know, when I rode up to this ranch 10 years ago, I was looking for work and a fresh start. I had no idea I was going to find my whole life here. The woman I loved, a home, a family, a purpose. Everything that matters. I was drowning when you showed up," Natalie admitted. "So scared and alone, trying to hold on to something that felt like it was slipping away no matter how hard I fought. And then there you were, asking if I needed a partner. Best decision I ever made was saying yes." "Best decision I ever made was asking," Daniel said. He turned to kiss her, gentle and sweet, a kiss that contained all the years they had shared and all the years still to come. Thomas called out from down the hill, asking if they could go see the new foal that had been born that morning. Daniel and Natalie gathered up their picnic things and walked hand in hand down the hill toward their children, toward the ranch house that had been in Natalie's family for generations, and would hopefully be in their family for generations more. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and triumphs. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with sick cattle and broken equipment, celebrated good years and struggled through bad ones. Thomas grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did, while Elizabeth surprised everyone by developing a talent for training horses, and James showed an aptitude for the business side of ranching. When Thomas turned 18 in 1897, Daniel and Natalie legally made him a partner in the ranch, adding his name to the title. It was important to both of them that their children understood the ranch would be theirs someday, that the work they were doing was building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. "This land has been in your mother's family since 1855, Daniel told all three children one evening at dinner. "Your great-grandfather crossed the country in a wagon to get here, built this house with his own hands. Your grandfather spent his whole life making it prosper. And your mother fought to keep it when she was alone and everyone told her to give up. That's the legacy you're inheriting, not just property and cattle, but determination and vision and love for this land." "We know, Papa," Elizabeth said gently. She was 15 now, beautiful and confident. "You and Mama have taught us well. This ranch is part of who we are." Natalie reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand, too moved to speak. Looking around at her family, at the children she and Daniel had raised, and the life they had built together, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and accomplishment. As Daniel and Natalie grew older, they gradually handed over more of the day-to-day operations to their children, though they remained active and involved. They had earned the right to slow down a little, to spend more time enjoying each other's company, and less time working from dawn to dusk. On a warm summer evening in 1905, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They were both in their 40s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind and hard work. But when Daniel looked at Natalie, he still saw the fierce young woman who had faced him down with a rifle. And when Natalie looked at Daniel, she still felt the flutter of excitement she had felt the first time he kissed her in the barn during a thunderstorm. "Thomas asked me today about dividing the property eventually," Daniel said. "He wants to make sure all three kids get equal shares." "What did you tell him?" Natalie asked. "That it was a good question, but he should discuss it with his mother, since this is her family's land." Natalie smiled. "After all these years, you still defer to me on that." "It's important," Daniel said simply. "I've built my life here and I love this place as much as if I'd been born to it. But you were born to it, and that means something. Your roots go deeper." "Our children's roots go just as deep," Natalie pointed out. "And they're your children as much as mine. This ranch belongs to both of us now, Daniel. It has for years. We built this together." Daniel pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder the way she had done 1,000 times before. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, horses nickering in the barn, cattle lowing in the distance, the chirp of crickets starting up as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. "You remember the first night we sat out here together?" Natalie asked. "After you had been working here for about a week." "I remember," Daniel said. "You were telling me about your mother, how she used to sing while she worked, and I was thinking that I had never met anyone like you, so strong and vulnerable at the same time." "I was thinking that I was glad you had shown up," Natalie admitted, "that maybe I was not going to lose everything after all." "You would have found a way even without me," Daniel said. "You're the most stubborn, determined person I've ever known." "Maybe," Natalie allowed. "But it would have been a lot harder and a lot lonelier. I needed you, Daniel, not just your help with the work, but you, your strength, your kindness, your belief that we could make it work." "I needed you too," Daniel said. "I was so tired of drifting, of working for other people's dreams. When I saw this place, saw you standing there refusing to give up, I knew I had found what I was looking for. Home, purpose, love." They kissed softly, sweetly, a kiss between two people who knew each other completely and loved each other still. In the distance, They could hear their grandchildren playing, Thomas's two boys and Elizabeth's daughter, running wild in the summer evening the way their parents had done before them. "We did well," Natalie said. "We really did." "We did," Daniel agreed. "And the best part is, it's not over yet. We've got years ahead of us still. Years of watching our grandchildren grow, seeing what our children build on what we started," Natalie said. She turned to look at the ranch spread out before them, the buildings solid and well-maintained, the pastures green and full of healthy cattle, the garden thriving beside the house. "My father would be proud, I think, to see what we've done with his legacy." "I'm sure he is," Daniel said. "And I hope when our time comes and we're buried up on that hill next to him and your mother, our children and grandchildren will be able to look back and feel that we left them something worth having. Not just the land," Natalie said, "but the example. That you fight for what you love, that you work hard, that you treat people fairly and honor your commitments. That's what we're really passing on." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Daniel and Natalie remained on the porch, talking quietly about the past and the future, about their children and grandchildren, about all the small and large blessings that made up their life together. The ranch that Natalie had been so close to losing all those years ago was thriving now, secured for generations to come. And the partnership that had begun with a simple question from a cowboy looking for work had become the foundation of a love that had lasted through decades of hard work, joy, sorrow, and triumph. When they finally went inside for the night, walking hand in hand through the house that held so many memories, Natalie looked around at the home they had built together and felt nothing but contentment. The fear and loneliness that had driven her in those dark days after her father's death were distant memories now, replaced by the solid reality of family, prosperity, and enduring love. The Vaughn Parker Ranch, as it was now known, stood as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together with determination, respect, and love. And as Daniel and Natalie climbed the stairs to their bedroom, they did so knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them the same way they had faced every challenge for the past 27 years. Side by side, as partners, as lovers, as the two halves of a whole that had been meant to find each other all along. In the years that followed, they continued to be active in the ranch's operation well into their 50s and early 60s, though they increasingly relied on their capable children to handle the bulk of the work. Thomas took over as the primary manager, with Elizabeth overseeing the horse breeding program they had started, and James handling the business and financial aspects. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under the second generation's management, fulfilling Daniel and Natalie's hopes that their legacy would endure. They watched with pride as their grandchildren grew and began to take their own places in the ranch's operation. Some showed the same fierce dedication to the land that had characterized Natalie's relationship with it, while others developed different interests and talents. But all of them understood the history of the place they called home, the story of how their grandfather had ridden up one day asking if their grandmother needed a partner, and how that simple question had changed everything. On their 35th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were dozens of people now, children and grandchildren, cousins and in-laws, friends from town and neighboring ranches. The house that had once echoed with loneliness when Natalie lived there alone now rang with laughter and conversation, and the sound of children playing. As Daniel looked around at the crowd, at the life he and Natalie had created together, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment and peace. They had taken a failing ranch and a desperate situation, and built something beautiful and lasting. More importantly, they had built it together, honoring each other's strengths and supporting each other through weaknesses, treating their marriage as the true partnership it had always been meant to be. That evening, after the guests had departed, and the children and grandchildren had gone to their own homes on various parts of the expanded property, Daniel and Natalie walked up to the hill where her parents were buried. They did this often, finding peace in the quiet spot with its view of the entire ranch spread out below. "I brought you here on our 10th anniversary," Daniel reminded her. "Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Natalie said. "The children were so young then. Thomas was just learning to really ride, and Elizabeth was obsessed with that old barn cat." "They've done well for themselves," Daniel said with satisfaction. "All three of them, strong, capable, good people." "They learned from the best," Natalie said, leaning into his side. Even after all these years, she still found comfort and security in his presence, still felt that spark of attraction when he smiled at her a certain way. "We learned as we went," Daniel said, "made plenty of mistakes along the way. But we always worked through them together," Natalie pointed out. "That's what made the difference. Neither of us trying to handle everything alone, neither of us too proud to admit when we were wrong or needed help." They stood in silence for a while, watching as the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared. The ranch below them was settling into its evening routine, lights beginning to glow in windows, smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared dinner. "If you could go back to that day when I rode up and asked if you needed a partner," Daniel said slowly, "knowing everything that was going to happen, all the hard times as well as the good times, would you make the same choice?" Natalie turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "In a heartbeat," she said. "Without a single second of hesitation. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Daniel Parker. You saved my ranch, yes, but more importantly, you saved me. You taught me that I did not have to be alone, that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom. You gave me a family and a partnership and a love that has sustained me through everything." Daniel's eyes were bright with emotion as he pulled her close. "You gave me all of that and more," he said. "A home, a purpose, a place to belong, children to raise and a legacy to build. And every single day of our life together, you've shown me what real strength looks like. I've never stopped being amazed by you." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who had chosen each other decades ago and continued to choose each other every day since. When they finally pulled apart, they stood with their arms around each other, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to preserve and improve. "Come on," Natalie said eventually. "Let's go home. I'll make us some coffee and we can sit on the porch like we always do." "Best offer I've had all day," Daniel said with a smile, taking her hand. They walked down the hill together through the gathering darkness, their steps in sync after so many years of walking side by side. Behind them, the graves of Natalie's parents stood sentinel over the ranch, and all around them the land breathed and lived, carrying forward the legacy of hard work and dedication that had been passed down through generations. The ranch house welcomed them with warm light spilling from the windows. Inside, they moved through the familiar rooms with the ease of long practice, Daniel starting the coffee while Natalie got out the cups and the remains of the anniversary cake. They took their cups out to the porch and settled into the swing that had been replaced 3 times over the years but always put back in the same spot. "I've been thinking," Natalie said after a while. "We should write down the history of this place. Not just the dates and facts, but the real story. How your grandfather built the house, how my father struggled through the hard years, how we met and saved the ranch together. For the grandchildren and the generations that come after them." "That's a good idea," Daniel agreed. They should know where they come from, what it took to build what they are inheriting. Will you help me write it? Natalie asked. I want it to be both of our voices telling the story. Of course, Daniel said. We'll start tomorrow. We can work on it together the way we do everything. As the night deepened around them and the stars wheeled overhead, they sat together in comfortable silence, occasionally speaking but often just enjoying each other's presence. This had become their favorite time of day, these quiet evening hours when the work was done and they could simply be together. Inside the house, on the mantel above the fireplace, sat a collection of photographs documenting their life together. Their wedding day, the children as babies, family gatherings, cattle drives, and celebrations. Each image captured a moment in the ongoing story of the ranch and the people who loved it. But the real story was in the lived experience, in the thousands of days of hard work and small kindnesses, arguments and reconciliations, triumphs and setbacks that had woven their lives together into something stronger than either of them could have created alone. As they finally rose to go inside for the night, Natalie paused at the door and looked back at the dark landscape. Thank you, she said softly. For what? Daniel asked. For showing up that day. For asking if I needed a partner. For staying and building this life with me. She turned to him with a smile. For everything, really. Daniel kissed her forehead gently. The pleasure has been all mine, he said. Every single day of it. They went inside together, closing the door on another day in the long string of days that made up their marriage. Outside, the ranch settled into sleep under the watchful stars, secure and thriving, a living testament to the power of partnership, determination, and love. The legacy that Thomas Vaughn had built, and that his daughter Natalie had fought to preserve, had been transformed by the addition of Daniel Parker into something even greater. Not just a successful ranch, but a true family home that would endure for generations to come. And so the story that had begun with a desperate young woman trying to save her father's ranch, and a wandering cowboy looking for a place to belong, had become a tale of enduring love and partnership, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on a stranger who asks a simple question at just the right moment.